Before we start implementing our modules, there's one more thing we should create. If we collapse this field folder here and open up the clip module right here, what we should do is create a clip error type. This clip error will be in events where we are unable to create these fields. For example, I mentioned that the content field has to have some kind of content. So if it doesn't have content, we'll need an error to reflect that there's no content. The same applies to a few other fields that may have different requirements. So we'll need an error type to encapsulate those. I'm going to be utilizing the this error crate in order to handle errors. So if we go down to our cargo.toml file, we can add the this error crate. I'm using version 1 for this project. We also don't want to forget to use the items from these crates. So we'll use the serde, serialize and deserialize. We'll also use error from this error. Next, we'll create an error enumeration. So I'm just going to name it clip error. I'll make sure to derive error. We'll also need to derive debug. So some of the errors that may occur are the password is invalid, so maybe there's some password complexity. So we'll add an error variant for that. Let's call it invalid password. We'll have a string so the user can be advised of what happened. We might also have a situation where there's a title that's invalid, so maybe we don't want certain things in the titles, so we can have invalid title. We also want to ensure that the content always has something in it, so we'll have an empty content error variant. We don't need to have any string for that since we know that empty content just means there's no content. Somebody might also provide an invalid date on the expires field, so we'll have an error variant for that. There's also the possibility that someone provides a date that's not even a date, and so that wouldn't parse correctly. So we'll have a parser error for that. And we'll use the from macro, and we're going to be using chrono to handle the time and date. So the chrono error that will occur if we can't parse it is a chrono parse error. While we're mentioning chrono, we might as well add it to our cargo.toml file. So let's hop back there now. And we're going to be using chrono. Chrono has some specific options in this case because we want it to work with serde, and we have to enable features to do so. So we're going to select a version. This particular project is using version 0.4, and we're going to enable some features. Specifically, we're going to enable the serde feature. It's important for this specific project that you use the versions that I'm indicating here because newer versions might change the API, and that could cause breakage in the program. So as long as you use these exact versions that I have listed, the program should work fine. When you're making a binary program like we are, it's always good to include these exact versions. That way your program always compiles. Once the chrono crate is added, we can go back to our module. We also have the possibility of the clip ID being invalid since that's parsed from some data from the database. So we'll include that as a possibility. So an ID error, and that'll be from using the UUID crate. And that specific error is just called error. UUID is short for Universally Unique Identifier, and usually you won't have any collisions when you use a UUID. And we'll be using those as individual IDs for the clips. That'll be our internal database ID. We'll need to add this crate to our cargo.toml file. So if we add it now, this is going to need specific features as well. We're going to be using version 0.8. And the features we will be enabling are serde, so it can work with serialize and deserialize. And we also want the v4 feature. The v4 feature enables version 4 of UUIDs. I believe there's version 1 through 5, and we're just going to be using version 4, which is essentially just a completely random string. The last error that we'll handle is if the number of hits is invalid. So we'll have hits, and we're going to convert from a standard num module try from int error. So these last two aren't strictly necessary because the UUID type and the number of hits are both going to be stored in the database as proper data types. However, just as a precaution, when we start working with the API, it may be possible to get invalid values for these. So it's good to have these errors just in case something happens. The last thing we need to do for this error enumeration is add the error macro in order to give these messages. So if we use error, we can give a message for each one. So I'm going to add messages. The first one will be invalid password. Remember that we can use the curly braces with a 0 to access the tuple value here. So this 0 will refer to the string. I'm going to add the rest of the error messages now. Now that these error messages are in, we'll be able to return errors for our fields if an attempt to create them fails.